Mom. Mom, pick me up. Easy. My love, calm down. Don't cry. The millionaire's baby burst into tears in front of hundreds of guests. No one understood until he saw the housekeeper and the child spoke for the first time. What he said changed their destiny forever. Before we start the story, comment from where you're watching us. I hope you enjoy this story. Don't forget to subscribe. The opulence of the Ballard mansion gleamed under the golden lights of the immense chandeliers hanging from the vaulted ceiling, illuminating the high society of New York gathered there. The air was filled with a heady mix of imported perfumes, rehearsed laughter, and the constant clink of crystal glasses brimming with the finest champagne. James Ballard, the host, and the most eligible widower in the city, stood in the center of the ballroom with a rigid posture projecting an image of absolute control that hid his deep melancholy. By his side, clinging to his arm like a venomous vine, was Valerie Bell, whose bright smile couldn't disguise the calculated coldness in her blue eyes. Everyone present knew that this night wasn't just a social gathering but the stage for an announcement that would seal the fate of the Ballard fortune and its young heir. In the peripheral shadows of the room, trying to blend into the wallpaper, moved Ariana, known there as Rose the housekeeper, dressed in an impeccable gray uniform. Her gloved hands delicately collected discarded napkins and empty glasses while her heart pounded with the constant fear of being recognized. Despite her efforts to be invisible, her natural beauty and noble features were hard to hide even under the modesty of her work attire. She watched the scene with a mix of sadness and resignation, knowing her presence there was as fragile as the crystal she cleaned. No one in that ballroom imagined that the woman mopping the floors held secrets capable of toppling empires, and that her connection to this family ran deeper than a simple employment contract. James raised his glass, calling for silence, and the murmur of conversations gradually faded into an almost reverential anticipation. With a firm voice but lacking the warmth it once held years ago, he began speaking about the need to move forward after the tragic loss of his wife Lauren. Valerie looked at him with feigned adoration, savoring in advance her definitive triumph before the society that judged her so harshly. "Tonight, I want to introduce you to the woman who will help me rebuild my home," announced James, prompting a wave of polite applause but devoid of genuine emotion. Ariana felt a knot in her stomach upon hearing those words, aware of the danger that union posed to little Ben. Suddenly, a heart-wrenching cry shattered the controlled atmosphere of the event, a sharp and anguished sound coming from the top of the grand marble staircase. Grandma Carmen James's mother appeared holding little Ben in her arms, who was writhing in desperation that alarmed all the guests. The child, who hadn't uttered a single word since his mother's death a year ago, cried as if his little heart were about to burst. James rushed toward them, leaving Valerie alone in the center of the room with a poorly disguised expression of annoyance on her perfectly made-up face. "I don't know what's wrong with him. He was asleep and woke up screaming," explained Grandma Carmen with a trembling voice, trying in vain to soothe her grandson. Ben, with his face red from crying and tears streaming down his cheeks, frantically searched the crowd of strangers filling his home. His small gray eyes scanned the room with an urgency that moved many of those present, ignoring his father's attempts to take him in his arms. Suddenly, his gaze stopped on the dark corner, where Ariana stood frozen, and the change in his expression was instantaneous and devastating. The child extended his arms toward her with surprising strength, struggling against his grandmother's grip as if his life depended on reaching that woman dressed in gray. That's when the miracle no one expected happened, the event that would change the course of that night and all the lives present. "Mom," shouted Ben with the clarity and power that echoed in every corner of the immense ballroom, silencing even the orchestra playing softly in the background. The word, loaded with infinite need and love, hit James like a physical blow, leaving him stunned and frozen halfway up the staircase. Valerie, for her part, felt the blood drain from her face, transforming her expression of triumph into a mask of absolute horror and disbelief. Before anyone could react, the child managed to free himself from his grandmother's arms and began running on his wobbly little legs toward the housekeeper. Ariana, with tears in her eyes, instinctively dropped to her knees, opening her arms to receive the impact of the small body launching toward her. The emotional collision was palpable when Ben crashed into Ariana's chest, clinging to her neck with a grip that promised never to let go. "Mom, Mom, Mom," the child repeated over and over, burying his face in her shoulder, finally finding the refuge he had sought so desperately. Ariana wrapped him in her arms, closing her eyes and letting her own tears fall onto his brown curls. Forgetting for a moment where she was and who was watching them. The silence in the ballroom was absolute, broken only by the child's sobs and the scandalized murmurs beginning to rise among the guests. James watched the scene with his mouth slightly open, unable to process why his son, who rejected everyone, was calling a housekeeper mother. Valerie regained her composure, fueled by a volcanic fury, and descended the steps with strides that echoed like death sentences on the marble floor. "What does this grotesque spectacle mean?" she hissed, breaking the intimate moment and drawing all eyes to her indignant figure. She walked straight toward Ariana and Ben with the clear intention of separating them by force if necessary, but Grandma Carmen stepped in her way. "Don't you dare touch him," warned the elderly woman with an authority that stopped Valerie in her tracks, though her eyes still shot daggers of hatred. "Don't you see what's happening? That woman has bewitched the child. She's brainwashed him to take advantage of us," accused Valerie, pointing at Ariana with an accusing finger. James finally reacted, shaking off the stupor and walking slowly toward the group, his gaze fixed on the way his son calmed in the arms of the stranger. "Ben sawn come to Dad," he tried to say, but the child reacted by hiding even more in Ariana's embrace and shaking his head frantically. "She's not your mom, Ben. She's Rose, the cleaning lady," insisted James, trying to impose logic on a purely emotional situation. "Mom," repeated the child, firmly looking his father in the eyes and then pointing at Ariana as if the truth were obvious to him. That simple affirmation, spoken with the innocence of a 2-year-old, crumbled any rational argument the adults might try to wield. "This is outrageous, James. You have to fire her immediately and call security to escort her out," demanded Valerie, trembling with rage. "That woman is an opportunist who's been manipulating an orphaned and vulnerable child to climb the social ladder." Valerie's accusations hung in the air, poisonous and cruel, seeking to sow doubt in everyone's minds. Ariana lifted her gaze, and for the first time her honey-colored eyes met James's gray ones, directly conveying an honesty that disarmed him. "I would never hurt him, sir. I only cared for him when no one else did," she whispered with a broken but firm voice. The guests murmured among themselves, some scandalized by the interruption, others moved by the scene, and many speculating about the nature of the relationship between the housekeeper and the child. "Since when does a housekeeper have so much access to the air?" wondered a bejeweled lady, while her husband observed with analytical curiosity. Grandma Carmen approached her son and placed a hand on his shoulder, whispering something no one else could hear, but that made James clench his jaw. "We'll take this to my study, away from this circus," ordered James with commanding voice, reclaiming his role as patriarch. "Valerie, Mother, and you, Rose, come with me right now," he instructed while pointing the way toward the mahogany doors. Ariana stood with difficulty carrying Ben, who refused to touch the ground, his weight both comforting and terrifying for her. In that moment she walked behind the Ballard family, feeling the judgmental stares piercing her back like hot needles, aware that her anonymity was over. Valerie marched ahead with her head high, but her clenched fists revealed the internal storm consuming her for being overshadowed at her own party. Upon entering the study and closing the doors, the sound of the party faded, giving way to an atmosphere charged with tension and pending truths. James positioned himself behind his imposing desk, looking at the 3 women and his son with an indecipherable expression. "I want the truth, and I want it now," demanded James, looking alternately at Valerie and Ariana, trying to understand the emotional puzzle before him. "The truth is that this woman is a witch who's gotten into the child's head," spat Valerie before anyone could speak. "Ben never speaks, never shows affection, and suddenly calls her mother in front of all New York society. It's a calculated humiliation." Ariana hugged the child tighter, protecting him from Valerie's shrill shouts, which prompted Ben to give her a loud kiss on the cheek. That gesture, so pure and spontaneous, was worth more than 1,000 arguments, and left Valerie momentarily speechless, choking on her own bile. "Mr. Ballard, I didn't seek this, but I couldn't leave him crying alone in his room night after night." Ariana began to explain with courage. "When the nannies fall asleep or get distracted, he wakes up scared, seeking comfort. And I was just there to give it to him. And why does he call you Mom?" inquired James, his voice softening slightly upon seeing the peace on his son's face. "Maybe because for a child, mother isn't the one who gives birth, but the one who's present to wipe away the tears," intervened Grandma Carmen with wisdom. Valerie let out a hysterical and cruel laugh. "How poetic, Carmen, but legally that's called parental alienation, and it's a crime." James ignored his fiancée and approached Ariana, standing just inches from her and the child who connected them inexplicably. "Who are you really?" "Rose?" he asked. noticing for the first time the refinement of her features and the education in her speech incongruent with her position. Ariana lowered her gaze, fearful that her past would catch up if she said too much, but knowing she couldn't keep lying completely. "I'm just someone who wants the best for Ben, sir. Someone who promised to care for him," she responded enigmatically. "Promised to whom?" insisted James, feeling he was on the verge of discovering something fundamental. Before Ariana could respond and reveal her connection to the late Lauren Valerie, slammed her palm on the desk. Enough interrogating the help as if she were family. "James, you have to throw her out tonight." "I'm not throwing out the only person who's gotten my son to speak," responded James with a coldness that chilled Valerie's blood. "Ben stays with her tonight, and tomorrow we'll talk calmly about his future care." Valerie gasped indignantly. "You're postponing me for a maid. On our engagement night, I'm prioritizing my son. Something you should have done from the beginning if you wanted to be his mother," sentenced James, drawing a clear line. Grandma Carmen nodded in approval. "Take the child to his room, Rose. I'll make sure no one bothers you." Ariana nodded gratefully and headed to the door, feeling momentary relief, but knowing a war had just been declared. As she left, she crossed glances with Valerie, and in the blonde's eyes she saw a promise of absolute destruction that chilled her blood. "This isn't over," whispered Valerie when the door closed. "I'm going to find out who you are and destroy you." The first chapter of this confrontation had ended, but the real battle for the truth and Ben's safety was just beginning. Ariana climbed the stairs with the child in her arms, aware that her life of invisibility was over forever. In the study, James poured himself a double whiskey, trying to drown the confusion and the strange hope his son's cry had awakened in him. And in the darkness of the night, Valerie Bell pulled out her phone to make a call that would unleash Ariana's past demons. To understand the miracle of that night, we need to go back 3 months to a hot July morning in New York City. Ariana, dressed in simple worn clothes, stood before the imposing service door of the Ballard mansion holding a crumpled newspaper. Her hair, once styled by professionals, was tied in a practical ponytail and her face lacked makeup, but her dignity remained intact. She had seen the ad for housekeeping staff and knew it was a sign from destiny, or perhaps a promise she had to keep. Her hands trembled slightly, not from the physical work ahead, but from the constant fear of being discovered by the men pursuing her. The door opened, revealing Hortensia, the head housekeeper, a sturdy woman with a scrutinizing gaze who had seen many employees come and go over the years. "You here for the ad?" she asked bluntly, looking Ariana up and down with a raised eyebrow, assessing her suitability. "Yes, ma'am. My name is Rose Johnson, and I'm very hard-working," lied Ariana with the fluency necessity had taught her. Hortensia noticed the young woman's soft hands inconsistent with a life of manual labor, but also saw honest desperation in her eyes. "Come in. I'll give you a trial, but we don't tolerate lazybones or thieves here," warned Hortensia, stepping aside to let her enter. The mansion's kitchen was an industrial space of stainless steel and marble, larger than the apartment where Ariana was currently hiding. As Hortensia explained the house rules, Ariana observed every detail, memorizing exits and routines, a habit acquired for survival. "Mr. Ballard is a busy and sad man. He doesn't like noise or disturbances," explained the head housekeeper while preparing coffee. "And the child is a special case. The nannies handle him. You just clean and don't get in the way." Ariana nodded submissively, though her heart skipped a beat upon hearing little Ben mention the son of her deceased friend. Her first task was cleaning the library, an immense room full of ancient books, and the smell of wood and tobacco, a place that painfully reminded her of her father. While dusting the high shelves, she heard shrill laughter from the garden contrasting with the house's silence. She peeked discreetly through the window and saw 2 young women, the supposed nannies, staring at their phones and laughing, completely ignoring a nearby playpen. Inside the playpen, a small boy with brown curls sat alone, staring into space with a sadness no child his age should know. It was Ben, and seeing him so emotionally abandoned broke Ariana's heart into 1,000 pieces. During the first days, Ariana dedicated herself to being invisible, performing her work with an efficiency that pleasantly surprised the demanding Hortensia. She cleaned, scrubbed, and organized, but her eyes and ears were always attuned to what was happening with the young heir of the house. She noticed how the nannies fed him mechanically without speaking to him, without looking him in the eyes, treating him like just another task on their list. She saw how James arrived late from work, entered to see his son for a few minutes with a pained face, and then locked himself in his study. The house was full of luxuries but empty of human warmth, a golden mausoleum where a child slowly withered from lack of love. One rainy afternoon, while Ariana cleaned the second-floor hallway, she heard a soft cry from the child's room. The nannies were downstairs flirting with the gardener and drinking coffee, sure the boy was napping. Ariana hesitated for a moment, knowing she was forbidden from entering the family area without express permission, but instinct was stronger. She pushed the door gently and found Ben standing in his crib, his face wet with tears and arms extended toward nothing. "Shh, little one, I'm here now," she whispered, entering quickly and making sure no one saw her from the hallway. Upon lifting the child, she felt how light he was, as if sadness had stolen his physical weight along with his voice. Ben tensed at first, surprised by the contact, but upon feeling Ariana's warmth and soft scent, he relaxed against her chest. She began humming a lullaby, the same one her own mother sang to her, and felt the child's heartbeat sync with hers. It was in that moment, in the dim light of a rainy afternoon, that the first link of an unbreakable chain was forged. Ariana knew then she couldn't leave, that her mission there wasn't to dust, but to heal a broken heart. The clandestine meetings became her secret routine. Every time the nannies slacked off, Ariana was there to fill the voids. She read him stories, doing different voices for each character, making Ben's gray eyes sparkle with interest. She taught him to play with blocks, celebrating each little tower he built as if it were a master engineering work. Ben began to wait for her, his eyes seeking her every time she entered a room, his small hand reaching out to her discreetly. Ariana talked to him constantly, telling him about the outside world, about flowers, about her own life, treating him as a complete person and not as furniture. Hortensia, who wasn't foolish and saw more than she said, began to suspect something, but upon seeing the positive change in the child, decided to keep quiet. "That girl has an angel's touch," she murmured to herself one day upon seeing Ben eat all his puree because Ariana was nearby cleaning the table. However, danger lurked in the form of Valerie Bell, who visited the house frequently to mark her territory. Valerie treated Ben with icy indifference, sometimes even annoyance, seeing him as an obstacle in her path to James. Ariana had to bite her tongue and lower her head every time Valerie made a cruel comment about the child's delay. One night, Ariana had a nightmare about her past. Sebastian found her, dragged her by the hair, and locked her in a dark tower. She woke up sweating and shaking in her small service room, reminding herself that now she was Rose, that she was safe for the moment. She pulled an old wrinkled photo of her father Leonard from under her mattress and kissed it devoutly silently, asking for forgiveness for having fled. "I'm doing this for you, Dad, so you don't suffer seeing me die in life," she whispered into the darkness, not knowing if he was still alive or dead. She quickly hid the photo upon hearing footsteps in the hallway, her alert state always at maximum. The next day, Ariana met Grandma Carmen, who had returned from a health trip, and observed the house with critical eyes. The matriarch immediately noticed the nanny's negligence and the strange connection between her grandson and the new housekeeper. "What's your name, dear?" asked Grandma Carmen one afternoon when she found Ariana arranging Ben's toys with unusual care. "Rose, ma'am," responded Ariana, feeling the elderly woman could see through her disguise with her penetrating but kind gaze. "You do a good job." "Rose, better than many who charge triple," said Grandma Carmen, planting a seed of alliance. The acid test came when Ben fell ill with a sudden fever that the nannies attributed to tantrums and decided to ignore. Ariana, while cleaning his room, noticed the child was burning up and breathing with difficulty, and without hesitation ran to get cold cloths and medicine. She spent hours lowering his fever, whispering words of encouragement while the caretakers slept peacefully in the adjacent room. When the fever finally broke, Ben looked at her with deep gratitude and for the first time managed a weak but genuine smile. Ariana cried with relief, kissing his sweaty forehead silently, promising him that she'd never let anything bad happen to him. It was that invisible dedication that prepared the ground for the cry at the party, cementing absolute trust in the child. Ariana didn't know that James had entered that night and seen her sleeping in a chair next to the crib, watching over his son's sleep. James said nothing then, but the image of that unknown woman caring for what he loved most etched itself in his memory. Thus, between secrets, fears, and silent acts of love, the 3 months passed that led Ariana to the center of the ballroom. She had found refuge in the lion's den, and Ben had found the mother Destiny had taken from him. Now, sitting on her bed after the party disaster, Ariana knew her time of anonymity had expired. She mentally reviewed her escape plan, her emergency backpack always ready, but upon thinking of leaving Ben, she felt unbearable physical pain. "I can't leave," she told herself with new determination. "I can't abandon him." So the fugitive decided to stop running and start fighting. The morning after the scandal, the Billard mansion dawned enveloped in a dense and silent atmosphere as if the house itself held its breath. Ariana went down to the kitchen before dawn with eyes swollen from lack of sleep and fear gnawing at her insides. Hortensia received her with a hot cup of coffee and a look mixing reproach and admiration, a difficult balance to maintain. "The boss wants to see you in the study at 9 sharp, and the nannies are packing," Hortensia let slip with barely disguised satisfaction. Ariana felt immense relief knowing those negligent women would no longer be near Ben, but the fear of her own interview paralyzed her. At 9, Ariana knocked on the study door, smoothing her uniform with trembling hands and breathing deeply to calm her racing heart. "Come in." James's voice sounded grave and tired from inside, inviting her into the lion's den. Upon entering, she found him reviewing papers with marked dark circles under his eyes and an evident expression of internal conflict. "Sit down, Rose," he indicated, pointing to a leather chair in front of his desk, eliminating the physical barrier of his authority. "I've fired Nora and Stella for gross negligence based on what I saw last night and what my mother has told me," began James directly. "What you did last night, what you've been doing these months?" James paused, searching for the right words. "Ben had breakfast with me today, and though he didn't speak, he was calm. He ate everything and smiled when I told him you'd come later." Ariana felt tears threatening to spill again upon hearing about the child's well-being. "Sir, I love Ben. He's a wonderful boy who just needs attention and affection," she said sincerely. "I know, and that's why I want to formally offer you the position of primary nanny with a salary increase and a room in the family wing," proposed James, observing her reaction. The offer was tempting and dangerous at the same time. Being in the family wing meant being more exposed closer to James and Valerie. "I accept, sir, but on one condition, that Miss Bell doesn't interfere with the child's care," Ariana dared to say. James was surprised by the boldness of the request but nodded slowly, recognizing the validity of the concern. "Valerie is my fiancée, but Ben is my son. Regarding his well-being, you have my authority," he assured. With that pact sealed, Ariana officially became Ben's protector, emerging from the shadows of cleaning into the light of caregiving. The transition wasn't easy. Valerie visited the mansion daily, patrolling the hallways like a shark scenting blood. Every time she saw Ariana playing with Ben in the garden or reading to him in the living room, her venomous comments didn't wait. "Look at that, the maid playing mommy, how touching and pathetic," she would say with a mocking smile. Ariana learned to ignore her outwardly, but inside she felt like walking on a minefield, measuring every word and action. But Valerie didn't limit herself to words. She began sabotaging Ariana's work, hiding toys, dirtying freshly washed clothes, or changing meal schedules. One afternoon, Ariana found Ben's favorite teddy bear destroyed on the living room floor with stuffing scattered like cotton entrails. Valerie was sitting nearby, filing her nails indifferently, and upon seeing Ariana's horrified face, simply shrugged. "Oh, I think the dog tore it up. What a shame. You should be more careful with the child's things," she said knowingly, knowing they had no dog. Ariana picked up the toy in silence, feeling a cold fury grow inside her, and spent the night patiently sewing it until it was like new. The next day, when Ben saw his repaired bear, he hugged Ariana so tightly that she knew she could withstand any attack from Valerie. Meanwhile, the relationship between James and Ariana began to change, subtly evolving from boss-employee to something more complex. James started arriving earlier from work, finding excuses to spend time in the playroom where they were. He observed how Ariana taught Ben how she laughed with him and found himself smiling for the first time in a long time. One night, he found them asleep on the couch with Ben on Ariana's chest and an open book on her lap, an image of domestic peace that wrung his heart. James covered them with a blanket, accidentally brushing Ariana's hand and feeling an electric spark that scared and attracted him at the same time. Grandma Carmen, always observant, noticed the growing tension and undeniable chemistry between her son and the nanny. "That girl has brought light to this house, James. Don't let Valerie's darkness extinguish it," she warned one night during dinner. James denied any romantic feelings, claiming gratitude and duty, but his eyes betrayed him every time they followed Ariana around the room. Valerie, of course, wasn't blind to this. Her jealousy transformed into dangerous paranoia upon seeing she was losing ground. She started investigating Rose Johnson, searching for any dirt, any crack in her perfect facade. Ariana, for her part, lived in a constant dichotomy, happy to be with Ben and terrified by her past and her growing feelings for James. She knew falling in love with her boss was a fatal mistake, especially with her false identity hanging by a thread. However, when James looked at her with those intense gray eyes and thanked her for caring for his son, her defenses crumbled. They began having small conversations about books, music, and life-stolen moments in the kitchen or garden that fed a forbidden intimacy. The breaking point of this chapter occurred during a thunderstorm that left the entire Upper East Side neighborhood without power. Ben cried, terrified by the thunder, and Ariana rocked him in the dark hallway, singing to calm him. James appeared with a flashlight, his face illuminated by the dim light, and upon seeing them so vulnerable and united, he lowered his guard. "I don't know what we'd do without you, Rose," he confessed in a hoarse voice, approaching closer than prudent. Ariana held his gaze, the air charged with electricity not just from the storm. "I don't know what I'd do without you either," she whispered. In that instant of shared vulnerability, they almost kissed their faces, drawing magnetically closer in the dimness. But the sound of a nearby thunder broke the spell, and both pulled away, aware of the abyss they were peering into. Valerie, who had arrived unannounced and watched from the shadows on the stairs, saw the exact moment of connection. Her eyes gleamed with pure malice. It was no longer just jealousy. Now it was a war for her future's survival. "Enjoy it while you can, dear," thought Valerie, "because your days in this house are numbered." Ariana retired to her room that night with her heart pounding wildly, knowing she had crossed an invisible line. She hugged her father's photo, asking for strength to resist, to not fall into the temptation of an impossible love. But destiny had already rolled the dice, and the bonds formed in the dimness of that mansion were stronger than any fear or social convention. The storm outside was just a prelude to the tempest Valerie was about to unleash on them. The atmosphere in the mansion became unbreathable as Valerie meticulously wove her plan to get rid of Ariana. It was no longer about simple biting comments. Now, Valerie operated with the precision of a malignant surgeon seeking to excise Rose from the Ballards' lives. She began sowing subtle doubts in James, mentioning articles about employees who stole or kidnapped children. "You never really know who you're letting into your home, darling. Appearances deceive," she said while serving him wine, planting seeds of distrust. James, though he defended Ariana, couldn't help feeling a sting of doubt given the lack of clear background on the nanny. Valerie increased her visits, arriving at odd hours to supervise Ben's education, criticizing every method Ariana used. "You're teaching him to be weak. A man needs firmness, not so many hugs," she reprimanded in front of James. Ariana maintained outward calm, but inside she felt like walking on a minefield, measuring every word and action. She knew Valerie was looking for an excuse, any tiny mistake, to justify her immediate dismissal. The scrutiny was such that even the service staff loyal to Ariana avoided crossing Valerie for fear of collateral damage. Valerie's master plan went into action on a Tuesday, a day she knew James would have important meetings and be distracted. She arrived at the mansion wearing an antique and ostentatious pearl necklace, making sure everyone, especially Ariana, noticed it. "It's a family heirloom worth a fortune," she commented loudly to Grandma Carmen while having tea with Ariana, serving the cookies. Later, Valerie went up to the guest room where Ariana was putting away clean clothes and left the necklace forgotten on a nightstand. "Rose, clean well here." "My mother is coming to stay a few days," she ordered with a smile that didn't reach her eyes before leaving and setting the trap. Ariana cleaned the room with her usual diligence, without paying attention to the jewel, focused on finishing quickly to return to Ben. She didn't see when Valerie returned stealthily minutes later, took the necklace, and headed straight to Ariana's room in the service area. With gloves to avoid fingerprints, Valerie slipped the pearls between the mattress and box spring of Ariana's bed, hiding them, but leaving them easy to find. "Checkmate," she whispered with satisfaction, closing the door and going down to the living room to wait for the detonation. The next day, chaos erupted when Valerie, feigning perfect hysteria, announced at the top of her lungs that her necklace had disappeared. "I left it on the nightstand yesterday, and it's gone." "Someone stole it," she screamed, while James tried to calm her. Grandma Carmen suggested searching thoroughly, but Valerie insisted she had already checked everything and that only one person had been there. It was her, it was that woman. Rose accused, pointing at Ariana, who had just entered the living room with Ben in her arms. "I didn't take anything, miss. I didn't even see the necklace." Ariana defended herself, feeling her blood run cold as she understood the trap. "Of course you deny it. That's what thieves do," retorted Valerie, demanding the police be called immediately. James, visibly uncomfortable, intervened before calling the police. "Let's search ourselves. I don't want scandals." Valerie agreed with false reluctance, knowing the result would be the same and that James would witness Ariana's guilt. The procession headed to the service room. James serious, Valerie triumphant, Grandma Carmen worried, and Ariana on the verge of collapse, fearing they'd find her fake documents. Upon entering the small room, Valerie went straight to pretend a superficial search in the drawers before heading to the bed. "Let's see if she was dumb enough to hide it here," she said, lifting the mattress with a theatrical movement. The pearly gleam of the exposed necklace hit Ariana like a physical punch. The pearls rested there, condemning her without words. "I knew it. She's a thief," shouted Valerie, taking the jewel and showing it to James like a hunting trophy. James's silence was devastating. He looked at the necklace and then at Ariana with an expression of deep disappointment that hurt more than any insult. "James, you have to believe." "I didn't put that there," pleaded Ariana with tears in her eyes. "Someone is framing me." "And who would do that, Rose?" "Why would anyone bother?" asked James, with a cold voice, doubt winning the battle in his mind. I don't know, but I swear on my life." "I'm innocent," she insisted, looking at Valerie, who smiled maliciously behind James. "That's enough, James." "Call the police and have her taken away in handcuffs," demanded Valerie, savoring her victory. Ariana felt the world closing in on her. If the police came, they'd discover her real identity and Sebastian would find her. She was trapped between being accused of theft or being handed to her executioner. Panic left her breathless. Grandma Carmen intervened then. "Wait a minute. This doesn't make sense. Rose doesn't need to steal, and least of all hide it in her own bed. Mother, the evidence is there." Cut James, though his voice denoted an internal struggle. "Rose, you're fired. You have 1 hour to pack your things and leave. I won't call the police out of respect for my son, but I don't want you in my house." James's sentence was a mortal blow. Being fired meant losing Ben, losing her refuge, and going out into the street unprotected. Ariana nodded, defeated, unable to prove her innocence against the evidence so skillfully planted. Valerie smiled. "You should thank James for being so soft." "In my house, you'd already be in jail." Ariana began gathering her few belongings, her hands shaking so much she could barely close the suitcase while tears blurred her vision. As she descended the stairs with her suitcase, Ben ran toward her, escaping Grandma Carmen's arms. "No, Mom. No," shouted the child, clinging to her legs in desperation, understanding she was leaving. James had to physically separate the child from Ariana, and his son's cry tore his soul, making him doubt his decision. "Are you sure about this, son?" asked Grandma Carmen sternly. "If that woman is innocent, you'll be making the biggest mistake of your life." Just as Ariana reached the front door, ready to step into exile, a male voice resonated from the study entrance. "No one leaves yet," announced Bruno James's lawyer and best friend, who had arrived just in time to witness the end of the scene. "James, before committing an injustice, I think you should see what the new security cameras we installed last week recorded." Valerie's color drained from her face instantly. She had completely forgotten the recent security system update. "Cameras," she stammered in the service hallway. Throughout the house, Valerie, including the staff rooms, confirmed Bruno with a predatory smile. "And I have a very interesting video from yesterday afternoon that everyone should see." The web of envy Valerie had woven so carefully was about to trap its own creator. Ariana dropped her suitcase, a spark of hope igniting in her chest, while James looked at his fiancée with a new and terrible suspicion. James's study turned into an improvised courtroom with palpable tension vibrating in the air like a string about to snap. Bruno connected his tablet to the large wall TV while everyone watched in silence. James, anxious. Grandma, Carmen, hopeful. Ariana, praying internally, and Valerie, visibly terrified. "Let's see what really happened yesterday at 4:30 p.m., said Bruno, pressing play with an accusing finger. The high-definition image showed the service hallway deserted and silent until a figure appeared in the frame. It was Valerie, unmistakable in her designer dress and arrogant stride, looking both ways to ensure no one saw her. In the video, she pulled a pair of latex gloves from her bag, put them on quickly, and entered Ariana's room without knocking. A murmur of astonishment swept the room. The visual evidence was irrefutable and demolishing. James stood up, approaching the screen as if he couldn't believe what his own eyes showed him. "What were you doing entering Rose's room?" Valerie asked in a low and dangerous voice without taking his eyes off the screen. The video continued, showing Valerie exiting 2 minutes later without the gloves, with a satisfied smile that chilled the blood of those present. I was just checking if I found something suspicious. I already suspected her." Valerie tried to lie, stuttering. "You didn't have the necklace when you entered, but you left empty-handed, or so it seems," pointed Bruno, zooming in on the image. But if we go back to the guest hallway, he switched cameras showing Valerie taking the necklace from the nightstand and putting it in her pocket before going down. The complete sequence destroyed any possible defense. Valerie had taken her own jewel and planted it to incriminate an innocent woman. James turned slowly toward his fiancée, his face transformed by a mix of fury and absolute repulsion. "You lied, manipulated my family, terrorized my son, and tried to destroy an innocent woman's life," enumerated James, each word striking like a whip. Valerie tried to approach him. "James, please, I did it for us. That woman is a danger. I had to protect you." "Don't come near me," shouted James, making her back away. "The only dangerous person in this house is you, Valerie. You're capable of anything to get your way." Grandma Carmen stood and hugged Ariana, who cried silently, releasing the accumulated tension of being unjustly accused. "I owe you a huge apology," Rose said, James looking at her with regret. "I was blind and a fool for doubting you." Ariana shook her head. "I just want to stay with Ben, sir. That's all that matters to me." Valerie, seeing her game was over, switched from pleading to vicious attack. "You're idiots. She's fooling you all. You don't know who she really is," she screamed desperately. "Investigate your precious Rose. She's an imposter," she threw as her last grenade before being silenced by Bruno. "Shut up, Valerie. Get out of this house right now and never come back," ordered James. "Our engagement is broken, and be thankful I'm not reporting you to the police for defamation and trespassing." Valerie's expulsion was humiliating and public. The security guards escorted her to the exit while she screamed incoherent threats. As she crossed the threshold, she turned one last time toward Ariana, who watched from the window. "This isn't over, you little dead fly. I'm going to uncover your secret and sink you," she promised with a look of pure hatred. The door closed behind her and silence returned to the mansion, but this time it was a silence of relief and cleansing. James collapsed into his chair, emotionally exhausted by the revelation of the true nature of the woman he was going to marry. "How could I be so blind?" he lamented, covering his face with his hands. "Sometimes pain prevents us from seeing the evil right in front of us, son," consoled Grandma Carmen. Ariana approached timidly. "Can I unpack my suitcase now?" James looked up and smiled sadly at her. "Please, Rose, this is your home and forgive me. That night dinner was different." James insisted Ariana sit at the table with them, definitively breaking social barriers. Ben was happy eating between his father and his mom, oblivious to the adult drama but sensitive to the reigning peace. Bruno, who had stayed for dinner, observed Ariana with professional curiosity. "You were lucky with those cameras, Rose. But Valerie is right about one thing. There's a mystery about you," he commented casually while drinking wine. Ariana tensed, knowing Bruno was a bloodhound and that Valerie would fulfill her threat to investigate her. Later, in the privacy of her room, Ariana felt the noose tightening despite her victory. She knew a woman like Valerie, wounded in pride and publicly rejected, wouldn't rest until seeing her destroyed. She pulled out her fake documents and looked at them with concern. They wouldn't withstand a serious investigation. "I have to tell them the truth before she does," she thought. But the fear of being handed over to Sebastian paralyzed her. Meanwhile, in her luxury apartment, Valerie drank vodka straight from the bottle and called a shady private investigator. "I want everything on Rose Johnson. Who is she? Where does she come from? Her fingerprints, everything. I'll pay triple if you find something dirty," she ordered in a slurred voice. The investigator accepted the job and thus began Ariana's countdown. The mansion's digital eyes had saved her from theft, but the outside world's eyes were about to discover the fugitive heiress. The chapter closed with a contrasting image. Ariana sleeping hugged to Ben, seeking peace, and Valerie in front of her computer, seeking war. Truth is like water. It always finds a crack to escape through, and Ariana's dam of lies was about to break. 3 days after Valerie's expulsion, the calm in the mansion was only the surface of a turbulent ocean. Valerie's private investigator, a man named Garrido, had worked fast and dirty obtaining fingerprints from a cup Ariana had used at a nearby coffee shop on her day off. The database result didn't yield any Rose Johnson, but Ariana Montgomery reported missing 3 years ago. Valerie received the report with a diabolical laugh. She had pure dynamite in her hands. That same afternoon, James received an anonymous envelope at his office containing newspaper clippings about the heiress's disappearance and a current photo of Rose. Upon reading it, James's world shook. The woman caring for his son wasn't a simple employee, but the daughter of one of the country's richest men. He returned home early, with the envelope in hand and 1,000 questions in his head, determined to confront her, but fearing the answer. He found Ariana in the garden reading to Ben under the shade of a maple tree, an image of innocence contrasting with the lie she lived. Ariana said James aloud, using her real name for the first time to see her reaction. She froze, the book falling from her hands, and turned slowly, her face drained of color. How did you call me?" she whispered, knowing the game was over. "Ariana, Montgomery heiress to Montgomery Labs. Missing fugitive," recited James, tossing the envelope onto the garden table. Ben, sensing the tension, ran to hug Ariana's legs. "Can I explain?" "James?" "Please, it's not what it seems," she pleaded, trembling. "It's not what it seems. Aren't you a millionaire playing poor?" "Are you mocking us?" he asked, hurt by the deception. "No, I'd never mock." "I'm running to save my life," confessed Ariana, breaking into tears. James, seeing her genuine terror, softened his stance and sat indicating she speak. Ariana told him everything: her sick father, the forced engagement to Sebastian Ugarte, the physical and psychological abuse, and her desperate flight the night before the wedding. She showed him the scar on her shoulder, a reminder of Sebastian's fury, and James felt a wave of nausea and protective rage. "I couldn't tell my father. He was dying. I wanted him to die in peace, thinking I was safe," she explained. "So I disappeared, left all my money, my name, my life to become nobody and be safe. And what does this have to do with us?" "Why my house?" asked James, trying to connect the dots. Ariana took a deep breath, preparing to reveal the second part of her secret. "I knew Lauren." She dropped, and the name of his deceased wife hit James. "A year and a half ago, at the hospital where I worked cleaning, she was admitted after her accident." Ariana recounted the nights she spent talking with Lauren, how they became friends and confidants in the hospital's solitude. "She told me she was scared, James. Scared of Valerie." "She knew the accident wasn't a coincidence," revealed Ariana. James paled. "Lauren said something to me, but I thought she was delirious from the meds. She wasn't delirious. Valerie tried to kill her that first time and failed. And Lauren made me promise something: if she died, I'd care for Ben. She showed me photos of him, told me Valerie was a monster and that I couldn't let her raise him," continued Ariana with a firm voice. "When I learned Lauren had died in the second accident, I knew Valerie had succeeded, and I knew I had to keep my promise." James cried openly now, finally understanding the magnitude of Ariana's sacrifice. She wasn't an opportunist. She was a guardian angel who had entered the lion's den to protect his friend's legacy. "That's why Ben recognized you?" whispered James. "Lauren talked to him about you, showed him your photo, told him you were safe." "Yes. He felt I came from his mother," confirmed Ariana, stroking the child's hair. James knelt before her, taking her hands. "Forgive me for doubting. You're the bravest woman I've known." But the reconciliation moment was interrupted by Ariana's phone ringing. It was an unknown number. Upon answering, a male voice, soft and terrifying, chilled her blood. "Hello, my love. I found you. I'm coming for you." It was Sebastian. Valerie had sold him the information. The phone fell to the grass as Ariana went into total panic. "He's coming for me. Sebastian, he's coming for me. I have to go. I have to run right now." James stopped her, holding her by the shoulders. "You're not going anywhere. You're not running anymore. You don't know him. He's powerful. He's violent. He'll hurt you and Ben." She screamed hysterically. "I don't care who he is. You're in my house. You're part of this family, and I'll protect you with my life if necessary," swore James. He called Bruno and his security chief, ordering the mansion locked down. "No one in, no one out. I want armed men on the perimeter." Grandma Carmen took Ben to the panic room while James and Ariana waited in the main living room. The truth had come to light, but with it came the demons of the past. Night fell over the mansion like a heavy mantle. Ariana trembled in James's arms, who didn't let her go for a second. They knew Sebastian was on his way, driven by obsession and wounded pride. The war had stopped being cold and become an imminent physical threat. The chapter ended with the sound of a powerful engine roaring at the mansion's entrance. The headlights of a sports car illuminated the windows, casting long and menacing shadows in the living room. Sebastian Ugarte had arrived, and he wasn't coming to talk. The final confrontation was served. The engine's roar ceased, leaving a sepulchral silence broken by the sharp slam of a car door. From the living room window, protected by curtains, James and Ariana watched as a tall, elegant figure descended from the vehicle. Sebastian Ugarte walked toward the main entrance with the confidence of an owner, ignoring the security guards already mobilizing to intercept him. He wore an impeccable suit that hid the violent beast living beneath the silk and cotton. "Don't go out. Stay here," ordered James to Ariana, seeing the absolute terror in her eyes. He has weapons." "James, be careful," she pleaded, clinging to his arm. "I have the law and truth on my side," he responded, kissing her forehead before stepping out to the porch. James planted himself in front of the solid oak door, flanked by two of his best security men awaiting the onslaught. Sebastian reached the foot of the stairs, smiling with a chilling coldness. "Good evening. I've come to pick up my fiancée, Ariana Montgomery." "I know you have her here," he said in a calm voice, as if requesting a forgotten package. "No one here belongs to you," Ugarte responded, James firmly crossing his arms. "Ariana is here of her own will and under my protection." Sebastian's smile vanished, replaced by a predator's gaze. "She has no will. She's sick, confused. You're taking advantage of a vulnerable woman," he accused, projecting his own faults. "The only sickness she has is the fear you caused her. I know what you did to her. I know about the beatings." The abuse launched James. Sebastian tensed his fists, clenching at his sides. "Those are lies from a hysteric. Ariana is mine. I paid for her. Her father gave her to me." "Ariana isn't an object to buy. She's a free woman," retorted James. "And I warn you, if you take one more step, it'll be considered trespassing." Sebastian let out a mocking laugh. "I don't care about your laws, Ballard. I have judges on my payroll. I'm going in and taking her." He gestured, and two armed men got out of his car, pointing toward the entrance. Tension escalated to the maximum. James's guards drew their weapons, aiming at Sebastian's men. It was a full-blown standoff about to turn into a bloodbath. "Stop!" shouted a voice from the door. Ariana came out with her head high, despite her fear, unable to let James die for her. "Leave them alone, Sebastian. It's me you want." "Ariana." "Get inside," shouted James, trying to shield her with his body. Sebastian looked at her with a mix of desire and sick possession. "There you are, my love. Look how you've lowered yourself, dressed like a servant. Come here right now, and I'll forget this little slip," he ordered, extending his hand. Ariana looked at him with disgust. "I'd rather die than go back to you. I'm not afraid of you anymore." That declaration shattered Sebastian's ego. "Then you'll die," he shouted, snatching a gun from one of his men and aiming at Ariana. Time seemed to stop. James lunged over Ariana to protect her just as a shot rang out. The boom echoed in the night, followed by screams and confusion, but the bullet missed its mark. A precise shot from the upper balcony had hit Sebastian's hand, sending his gun flying. It was Bruno the lawyer, who was also an expert marksman and had been covering the scene from above. Sebastian screamed in pain, falling to his knees and clutching his bleeding hand. His bodyguards, seeing they were outnumbered and their boss down, lowered their weapons and raised their hands. "Call the police." "Now," shouted James, keeping Ariana close to his chest, frantically checking if she was hurt. I'm fine," she sobbed, trembling uncontrollably. Sebastian on the ground cursed and promised revenge, but his power bled out along with his wound. He had underestimated James's determination and Ariana's bravery. In that moment of chaos, another car arrived, screeching to the entrance. It was Valerie, who had come to enjoy the spectacle of Ariana's fall. Upon seeing Sebastian wounded and defeated, her triumphant face turned to panic. She tried to reverse and flee, but the police patrols called by Bruno minutes earlier blocked the exit, closing the trap. The police, led by an honest commander, Bruno knew took control of the scene. They arrested Sebastian and his men, disarming and cuffing them. The untouchable Ugarte was being dragged like a common criminal, screaming he'd sue them all. Ariana watched him go and felt a ton-weight lift from her shoulders. The monster no longer had claws, but the night still held one last surprise. While the police secured the area, Bruno approached the patrol where Valerie was detained for obstruction. "You're not getting away with just this, Valerie," he said through the window. "We have something else for you." Valerie looked at him with hatred. "What are you talking about?" "We're talking about Lauren," said James, approaching. "We're talking about the mechanic you hired to cut the brakes. He's already confessed." Color drained from Valerie's face, leaving her like a corpse. The storm at the threshold had passed, but for the villains of this story, hell was just beginning. Ariana and James embraced under the moonlight, surrounded by the blue lights of patrols, knowing they had survived. The physical threat had been neutralized, but now it was time to face legal justice and heal the soul's wounds. The following days were a whirlwind of legal procedure statements and media revelations. Sebastian Ugarte's fall was front-page news. Photos of his arrest and testimonies from his ex-girlfriends who gained courage to speak upon seeing he was no longer untouchable destroyed his and his family's reputation. His father, Armando Ugarte, tried to use his influences, but the scandal was too big, and the video evidence from the Ballard mansion was irrefutable. Society, which once flattered him, now turned its back in disgust. But the real drama unfolded in the interrogation room where Valerie Bell faced her fate. At first, she denied everything with arrogance, trusting her money would save her. However, Bruno had done his job impeccably. He presented the mechanic a man eaten by guilt, who narrated in detail how Valerie had paid him to sabotage Lauren's car not once, but twice. "She told me it was just to scare her, but the second time she asked me to make sure it didn't fail," confessed the man, crying. Additionally, bank transfers from Valerie's offshore accounts to the mechanic appeared, closing the circle of evidence. Faced with life imprisonment, Valerie broke. She screamed she did it for love, that Lauren had stolen James from her, that she was the victim. Her videotaped confession was shown to James privately. Seeing the woman who had been in his home near his son coldly admit to murdering his wife was the most painful moment of his life, but it also gave him the closure he needed. Lauren hadn't died in an accident. She had been murdered, and now her killer would pay. James cried for Lauren one last time, freeing himself from the guilt of not protecting her, knowing he had finally done justice. Meanwhile, Ariana faced her own healing process. With Sebastian in pretrial detention without bail, she could finally walk freely. James accompanied her to the clinic where her father Leonard was. Bruno had discovered he was still alive, fighting cancer, only for the hope of seeing his daughter once more. The reunion was heart-wrenching and beautiful. Leonard, emaciated and weak, came alive upon seeing Ariana enter. "I thought I'd lost you forever," cried the old man, caressing his daughter's face. "I'm here, Dad, and I'm safe." "Thanks to him," said Ariana, pointing to James. Leonard looked at James and saw in him the man Sebastian never was: a protector, a companion, a good man. "Thank you for returning my daughter to me," he said with a broken voice. James promised him he'd care for her always. Ariana reclaimed her identity as Ariana Montgomery, but decided not to return to her old life of empty luxuries. She stayed in the Ballard mansion not as an employee, but as James's partner and heart mother to Ben. The press went wild with the story of the Cinderella heiress, but they kept their private life away from the spotlights, shielding their happiness. Valerie's trial was swift. The jury showed no mercy for the coldness of her crimes. She was sentenced to 40 years in prison without parole. Upon hearing the sentence, Valerie sought James's gaze in the courtroom, perhaps expecting a hint of compassion, but found only indifference. She no longer existed for him. She was led out of this room screaming, a pathetic figure consumed by her own hatred. Sebastian, for his part, faced multiple charges for attempted homicide, kidnapping, and assault. His sentence was equally severe, and in prison, without his expensive suits and surname to protect him, he learned what the fear he had inflicted on others meant. Justice, though late, had been absolute. With the guilty paying their penalties, the shadow over the Ballard mansion dissipated completely. The air felt lighter, the colors brighter. Ben, who now spoke fluently, ran through the gardens laughing, calling Dad to James and Mom to Ariana naturally. James and Ariana spent afternoons by Leonard's bedside, allowing him to enjoy his last days surrounded by love and the family he never thought he'd have. The old man grew fond of Ben, seeing him as the grandson life gifted him at the end. "Now I can go in peace," said Leonard, seeing his daughter happy and safe. The chapter closed with a dinner on the terrace. No great luxuries, just laughter, good wine, and the sense of peace only achieved after crossing hell. Ariana looked into James's eyes and knew that despite all the pain, she'd go through it all again, if the destiny was that exact moment. 6 months later, the Ballard mansion dressed up, but this time not for a cold society reception, but for an intimate wedding full of true love. The garden was decorated with white flowers and soft lights. Leonard, in a wheelchair but with a radiant smile, wheeled Ariana to the improvised altar under the old oak. She wore a simple but beautiful dress, and in her eyes there was no longer fear, only a bright future. Ben, in a little suit, carried the rings with comical and adorable seriousness. Upon reaching James, the child hugged his father, and then Ariana joining their hands. "I declare you husband and wife," said the judge. And the kiss that followed was sealed with sincere applause from Grandma Carmen Hortensia Bruno and the few loyal friends remaining. Leonard passed away 2 weeks after the wedding in peace. Ariana inherited Montgomery Labs and with James's help transformed the company. They created a foundation in honor of Lauren and Leonard dedicated to helping women victims of violence and orphaned children. The housekeeper who once mopped floors now ran an empire but never lost the humility learned in her darkest days. A year later, Ariana entered James's study with news. She handed him a small box. James opened it and found a positive pregnancy test. They cried together, embraced, knowing the family was growing. Ben received the news with jumps of joy, promising to be the best big brother in the world and care for the baby as Ariana had cared for him. When the girl was born, they decided to name her Lauren in honor of the woman who even in absence had orchestrated their union. Little Lauren had Ariana's eyes and James's smile, and from day one was adored by her big brother. The house, once silent and sad, was now full of noise, toys, and life. Ariana often sat in the garden watching her children play and thought of the strange path that led her there. She remembered the fear, the flight, the pain, but also the hope she found in the eyes of a mute child. Sometimes she felt a soft breeze and knew it was her friend smiling from somewhere, happy that her promise had been fulfilled beyond imagination. Grandma Carmen lived her last years surrounded by great-grandchildren telling the story of how a rose saved her family. Hortensia remained the head housekeeper now with more help and fewer scoldings, proud to have been the first to open the door to the future lady of the house. Bruno became the favorite uncle, always bringing gifts and recalling how his aim saved the day. The story of Ariana and James became a local legend, proof that love is stronger than fear and truth always prevails. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was a story of survival and choice. They chose to love, chose to fight, and chose to be happy. And so on a golden afternoon with the sun setting over the mansion that was once a prison of sadness and now a home of light, Ariana closed the book she was reading to her children. And they lived happily ever after. Mom asked Ben. Ariana kissed his forehead and looked at James approaching. They lived, my love. They lived with bravery and much love, and that's better than any tale. The echo of that mom cry at the party had transformed into a symphony of life. The past was forgiven the present, a gift, and the future theirs. If you liked this story, we'd appreciate it if you rated it from 1 to 10. Support us with a like and subscribe to our channel, Tales of Kindness. Comment from where you're watching us. Thanks for your unconditional support in every story. Blessings to you and your family.